As we focus on subtracting decimal numbers without base 10 blocks in this lesson, I'd like you to take notice on two things. Number one, the terminology that we use regarding subtraction questions. The second thing is how we line up the numbers before we subtract them. The question asks us to find the difference between 2 and 33 hundredths and 1 whole and 12 hundredths. And in this question, remember I said two things you need to be aware of? Number one was the terminology. The terminology in this question relates to the word difference. Difference always means subtract. So we're going to take these two numbers and subtract them. The first number in subtraction is always called the minuend. It doesn't matter if it has a decimal visible or if there's no decimal, like questions like 3 minus 1. The 3 is always going to be the minuend. The first number in subtraction is always the minuend. The second number is always called the subtrahend. Make sure you remember those terms. The second thing, remember two things out of this lesson. Number one, you need to understand the terminology. Second thing is how to line up the numbers. This is an incorrect way to line up the numbers, and I'll tell you why it's incorrect. Place values have to line up on top of each other whenever you subtract numbers and add them, but that's another lesson. When you subtract numbers, the wholes have to be on top of the wholes, the tenths have to be on top of the tenths, and the hundredths have to be on top of the hundredths. Right now, we've got the wholes on this number, and we have the tenths on the number above it. And they are not lined up properly. We can't have tenths on top of wholes. We need to have tenths on top of tenths. Now, a quick review. If you don't know this, you need to go back to my other lessons regarding place value. But as a quick review, after the decimal, the first spot is always called the tenths. The second spot is always called the hundredths. And then the thousandths, and then the 10,000ths, and so on. And the spot on the left of the decimal is always called the wholes, or the units. So we need to shift this number over. We're going to shift it over, and now we have wholes on top of wholes. We have the tenths and the hundredths all lined up. And the decimals, of course, are lined up. And that's the fast, quick way, foolproof way of making sure your numbers are lined up, is if the decimals are on top of each other. The rest of it is subtraction like you did in grade 2 and grade 3. You got to borrow if you have to borrow. And let's see how we do this. We have 3 minus 2 is 1. We have 3 minus 1 is going to be 2. We have decimal, decimal, decimal. We have 2 minus 1 is 1. Some of you may know what I'm about to say, and others of you might find it to be surprising news. However, if you want to check your answer over and make sure that you did this correct, well, how do we check subtraction? We check subtraction using addition. That's right, they're opposites. So all you do is you take the answer, you add it to the number above, and you should get the number on the top. So you go 1 plus 2 is 3. You've got 2 plus 1 is 3. You've got the 1 plus 1 is 2. That's how you check all subtraction questions. It doesn't matter how advanced they are. Remember I said you need to understand two things out of this lesson. Number one is the terminology. How much greater sounds at first to be an addition problem, because greater means you need to add numbers together, right? Not quite. How much greater actually tells us, it refers to a comparison between two numbers. To be greater, one number has to be compared to another number. And whenever we compare numbers, that's actually a difference that we're finding. If I say how much greater another number is, we're asking for a difference. This is a fancy way of referring to the difference between two numbers, and difference always means subtract. How you identify it without thinking about it too much, I went into the technicalities of it, but any word that ends with ER, more often than not, it's referring to a subtraction question. Like how much farther did something go? Subtraction. How much longer is something? An ER word is going to be a subtraction word. And here we have an ER word. How much greater? So we're going to subtract these two numbers. We will show our minuend. We will show our subtrahend. And we'll line them up. So we'll make sure the decimals are on top of each other. Now that they're lined up, we can subtract, but we have a problem because 3 minus 5 cannot be done. So we're going to have to ask the guy next door to borrow. He becomes a 2. He gives a 10 value to him. So now we have 13 minus 5. And we know 13 minus 5 is 8. And we're going to go 2 minus 4. Again, we can't do that. So the 2 asks this guy beside him if he can borrow one. And he says, oh, man, you know what? No problem. I'll lend you one. I've got one left over. I'm in a good, generous mood. I'll give you one of my 2. And now this guy has 12. Take away 4 is 8. We drop the decimal. This is nothing. And our answer is going to be simply 88 hundredths. You can also say 0 wholes and 88 hundredths. It's preferred not to. We don't mention the 0. We just say 88 hundredths, and that's good enough. Back to the terminology. How much less? Okay, we have another comparison. We're dealing with subtraction. So it's not an ER word. It doesn't say difference. It mentions how much less is one number compared to another. Anytime you're comparing two numbers, that's essentially asking for a difference. So we have to subtract these two. Big number comes first. Okay, don't forget that. Don't put this one first just because it came first in the sentence. Think about it. The difference between these two is going to be big number first.
Scene 1, Apple, take 1.
And the subtrahend.
Scene 1, Apple, take 2.
We're going to stack them up, line them up, and subtract them. We've got 5 take away nothing. That's 5. We've got 0 to take away 3. We can't do that. He borrows from the 4. He gets that 1 beside him. We've got 10 take away 3 now. That's going to be a 7. We've got 3 minus 6. Can that be done? Nope. We're going to have to borrow from this guy. We'll give him the 1. Now it's 13 take away 6. We'll put a 7, decimal, and the 1 comes over here. Remember how to check our answer over. We're going to have to add, right? We go backwards and add. We go 5 plus 0 is 5. That works. 7 and 3 makes 10. 7 and 6 is 13. 1 and 1 is 2.